Welcome back, Criminophiles, to another episode of Homicide Cases. I'm your host, Misfit.
I am Stephen Anderson, and I am responsible for 9 homicides that the police know of.
Chapter 1, Executive Summary. The scope of Stephen Anderson's criminality and execution.
Stephen Wayne Anderson, July 8, 1953 to January 29, 2002, was an American professional contract killer and documented serial killer. His execution by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison in California at age 48 concluded a 2-decade-long legal battle marked by extreme violence and severe constitutional controversy regarding the effectiveness of his defense counsel. Anderson's criminal profile was defined by calculated instrumental violence. He was formally classified as a contract killer and was either known to have killed or admitted to the killings of at least 9 individuals across multiple states, including Utah, Nevada, and California. This tally includes 6 admitted contract killings in Las Vegas, Nevada, the homicide of a fellow inmate while incarcerated in Utah, and the capital offense for which he was executed, the first-degree homicide of Elizabeth Lyman.
I was responsible for 9 deaths, but the homicide of Elizabeth Lyman was the one to get me executed.
The specific capital conviction stemmed from the May 1980 homicide of Elizabeth Lyman, an 81-year-old retired piano teacher in Bloomington, California. The conviction rested on first-degree felony homicide with special circumstances, as the homicide occurred during the commission of a burglary. Crucially, Anderson's long legal process became a landmark case for opponents of capital punishment due to compelling evidence of ineffective assistance of counsel. His trial attorney had a documented history of deplorable conduct and was deemed constitutionally ineffective in other contemporaneous capital cases. The judicial acceptance of Anderson's death sentence, despite profound deficiencies in representation, shifted the focus from the defendant's guilt, which was generally conceded, to the systemic integrity of the capital punishment system itself.
Even though my lawyer was less than effective and had a history of deplorable conduct, my petition was denied.
The personal character of Stephen Anderson, who was described as focusing only on old number 1 and forgetting about the rest of the world, provides a chilling context for his professionalism in killing. This self-serving focus culminated in his final moments when, having requested a complex last meal, he was very adamant that he did not have any final words before being pronounced dead at 12:30 a.m. His final silence, coupled with the documented narcissistic focus, suggests that he viewed the execution not as a moment for social repentance or explanation, but as a final indifferent act of calculated resignation, reinforcing the assessment that he only cared for himself.
Chapter 2, Etiology of Violence, Biographical and Early Criminal History.
The path to Stephen Anderson's prolific violence began in his childhood, characterized by profound instability and abuse. Born on July 8, 1953 in Utah, he was the older of 2 boys raised in a severely dysfunctional environment. His father was an alcoholic with a violent temper, and his mother was emotionally abusive.
When I was 14 years old, my parents kicked my brother and I out of the family home. It was tough, but we made it through.
At the critical developmental age of 14, Anderson and his brother were kicked out of the family home, forcing them to live precariously with friends and relatives. This combination of physical abuse, neglect, and abandonment created a foundation for severe antisocial behavior and psychopathology. The psychological ramifications of this early trauma were explicitly linked to his later criminality. The judicial process requires comprehensive consideration of such profound childhood trauma as a cornerstone of mitigation in capital defense. However, Anderson's defense attorney notoriously failed to investigate or present compelling details of this physical abuse and neglect, as well as other traumatic life experiences, including those suffered during incarceration. This failure meant the judicial verdict was rendered incomplete, as the sentencing body was deprived of legally essential information regarding Anderson's diminished moral culpability, though not his legal guilt. Anderson's criminal career began early, escalating rapidly from property crimes to armed confrontation. His first violent crime occurred in 1971 when he burglarized a school in Farmington, New Mexico, during which he threatened two police officers. He was convicted of burglary and sentenced to 1 to 5 years. He was paroled in 1975, only to return to prison to serve a significantly longer term of 10 to 50 years, stemming from multiple aggravated burglary convictions.
After several aggravated robberies, I was caught and given a 10 to 50-year sentence in prison.
While incarcerated at Utah State Prison, his inherent capacity for violence became fully institutionalized. He murdered fellow inmate Robert Bluedell via stabbing. He also committed numerous assaults on other inmates and a correctional officer. This period established a systemic trend of accelerating violence, moving from opportunistic property crime to premeditated lethal force with a maximum security environment. This demonstrated an individual who systemically leveraged institutional experience and a greater criminal expertise, setting the stage for his subsequent career as an escapee and professional killer. Anderson escaped from Utah State Prison on November 24, 1979, shortly before committing his capital offense in California.
Chapter 3: The Professional Criminal, Contract Killing and Serial Homicide Profile.
Steven Anderson's criminality extended far beyond the capital offense that led to his execution, positioning him as a rare offender who overlapped between instrumental professional homicide and impulsive opportunistic violence. He was explicitly engaged in contract killing. His classification as a serial killer derives from the admitted homicides, which total at least 9 victims.
After I escaped from prison, I committed 6 contract killings.
Anderson operated primarily in the Intermountain West, particularly confessing to committing 6 contract killings in Las Vegas, Nevada, all prior to the homicide of Elizabeth Lyman in 1980. The calculated nature of these contracted killings stands in sharp contrast to the low-yield, intoxicated burglary that led to his death sentence. The fact that he was executed for the opportunistic crime rather than the multiple proven premeditated contract killings underscores a critical limitation in the justice system. Capital eligibility is often determined by the legal special circumstance surrounding a single act, such as felony homicide in California, rather than a total scope of a killer's documented career. One specific instance of Anderson's professional work was the contract killing of Timothy Glasheen. The homicide occurred after Anderson's escape from Utah State Prison. Glasheen was a target commissioned by drug traffickers, for which Anderson was paid $1,000. Forensic analysis of this crime provided a crucial link to his later capital offense. Anderson admitted he shot Glasheen 4 times using the same .45 caliber handgun that he later used to fatally shoot Elizabeth Lyman. The confirmed use of the weapon solidified his culpability in the California case and legally tied his extensive pre-capital homicidal history directly into the evidence base at the San Bernardino murder trial.
I took the Glashan contract because I needed the money, and $1,000 was a lot in 1980.
Even before his conviction for capital homicide in California, Anderson demonstrated chronic institutional violence. While incarcerated in the California Department of Corrections, he received multiple rule violation reports, including charges for using force and violence in 1984 and 1985, and assaulting another inmate in 1987. This pattern confirmed the assessment that Anderson represented a severe and ongoing threat to public and institutional safety, regardless of the limitations of the legal counsel provided during his trial.
Chapter 4: The Capital Offense, the Homicide of Elizabeth Lyman, and the Path to Capital Punishment.
My freedom finally came to an end on May 26, 1980, after I took the life of Elizabeth Lyman.
The homicide of Elizabeth Lyman provided the judicial basis for Anderson's execution. Lyman was an 81-year-old retired piano teacher residing in Bloomington, California. Anderson, then 26, and an escapee from the Utah State Prison, broke into her house to burglarize it. He had been drinking a large quantity of vodka and claimed he thought the house was empty. The sequence of events was meticulously documented. In the middle of the night, Anderson cut Lyman's telephone line with a knife and gained entry by removing a glass pane from her French doors. He searched the house room by room. When he entered Lyman's bedroom, she awoke and screamed. Anderson responded by shooting her in the face from close range with his .45 caliber handgun, fatally wounding her. Following the homicide, he covered her body with a blanket and recovered the expelled casing from the hollow point bullet. He proceeded to ransack the house, finding less than $100.
I killed a woman and got the death penalty, all for $100. Pathetic.
Anderson's behavior post-homicide was highly erratic and unusual. He did not attempt to flee the house immediately. Instead, he remained at the scene for approximately 3 hours, preparing and eating a meal of noodles and eggs in the kitchen while watching television. This bizarre choice suggests a highly dysregulated and possibly dissociative psychological state, likely stemming from the combination of intoxication and severe underlying personality disorder, which may have compromised his cognitive control. Anderson was apprehended when the sheriff's deputies, called by a suspicious next-door neighbor awakened by barking dogs, arrived on the scene. Anderson was arrested at 3:47 a.m. and subsequently confessed to the crime, stating he remained remorseful about the homicide.
Today, we delve into the judicial process and resentencing of Steven Anderson. The case highlights the complexities of the legal system. The resentencing aims to address past errors.
The trial took place in San Bernardino County, where Anderson was convicted of 1 count of first-degree homicide with special circumstances and 1 count of residential burglary. The first jury sentenced Anderson to death on July 24, 1981. However, the legal process was unstable. The initial death sentence was overturned because the jury had not been instructed to consider whether the homicide had been intentional. This procedural failure, which necessitated a resentencing hearing, exemplifies the strict scrutiny applied to jury instructions in capital cases. In 1986, a second jury convened. After an extended deliberation lasting several days, this jury concluded that the homicide had been intentional and Anderson was sentenced to death again. The conviction was specifically based on first-degree felony homicide with a special circumstance finding that the homicide occurred during a burglary.
I wasn't too surprised when the second jury gave me the death penalty.
Chapter 5. Analysis of Judicial Failure, the Ineffective Assistance of Counsel.
The most contested aspect of Steven Anderson's case centered on his legal representation, which became the subject of extensive habeas corpus appeals asserting ineffective assistance of counsel in violation of his Sixth Amendment rights. Anderson was represented by the same court-appointed attorney for both his initial trial in 1981 and his resentencing hearing in 1986. The attorney's record in capital defense was profoundly deficient. In two other capital cases handled by the same lawyer in San Bernardino County between 1981 and 1986, appeal courts explicitly found that the representation had fallen below the constitutional standard. The courts described the attorney's conduct in these cases as deplorable. This situation created a systemic failure with the judiciary. 6 Ninth Circuit judges later dissented against the majority's refusal to conduct a rehearing, expressing regret that Anderson was sentenced to death while being represented by an attorney that the court had twice deemed constitutionally ineffective in capital cases. The dissenters noted evidence suggesting the attorney was deceptive, untrustworthy, and disloyal to his capital clients, even reportedly saying of one client that he did not care what happened to him. This history fundamentally undermined the credibility of the defense offered to Anderson. Anderson's IAC claims were analyzed under the rigorous two-part test set forth in Strickland v. Washington, demonstrating deficient performance and resultant prejudice. During the guilt phase, the attorney engaged in a risky strategic maneuver that was later scrutinized on appeal. He asked the jury to convict Anderson on straight first-degree homicide, but explicitly urged them not to convict on the basis of the felony homicide rule. The attorney recognized that seeking a complete acquittal was unlikely given the facts of the case. His request for the jury to convict on first-degree homicide while rejecting felony homicide was, in effect, a request for jury nullification. Had the jury followed this request, Anderson would have been ineligible for capital punishment because the felony homicide finding was the specific circumstance that made him eligible for the death penalty. The appellate review, while acknowledging the risks, characterized his move as a strategic calculation made to preserve credibility for the inevitable penalty phase, ultimately insulating the strategy from being deemed prejudicial despite its inherent proximity to malpractice. The most damaging deficiencies occurred during the 1986 penalty phase resentencing. The attorney's investigation and presentation of mitigating evidence were seriously flawed. Specifically, he failed to investigate or present compelling details of the physical abuse and neglect Anderson suffered during his childhood. This included the profound trauma resulting from having been kicked out of home at age 14. The attorney also overlooked traumatic prison experiences Anderson had endured in New Mexico. Furthermore, the presentation of mitigation was inadequate. The defense presented only one mitigation witness, a retired prison minister whose only meeting with Anderson had taken place the day before he testified. The profound failure to document and present Anderson's extensive background, of trauma deprived the jury of legally relevant information essential to determining moral culpability and mercy. The core legal paradox of Anderson's appeal is that while the attorney's actions clearly met the deficient performance standard, the courts ultimately found a lack of prejudice. The Strickland prejudice standard requires a showing that there is a reasonable probability that, but for counsel's errors, the result of the proceeding would have been different. Given Anderson's overwhelming history of calculated violence, including the stabbing death of an inmate, the successful execution of 6 contract killings, and the use of the same weapon in a contract killing as in a capital offense, the courts determined that the magnitude of aggravation was sufficient to overcome the limited mitigation presented. The legal conclusion meant that even if a highly competent attorney had presented a thorough case on Anderson's trauma, the outcome, which is the death sentence, would likely have been the same. However, the dissenting judges strongly contested this outcome, arguing that the documented severity of the attorney's known deficiencies, coupled with the systemic failure of the court to cease appointing him, should have been enough to meet the prejudice standard. They explicitly stated that Anderson's death sentence may well have been imposed, not because of the crime that he committed, but because of the incompetence of an attorney with little integrity and a pattern of ineffective performance in capital cases. This forceful dissent serves as a lasting judicial indictment of the constitutional integrity of the judicial process in this case.
Chapter 6. Conclusion. The Execution and Legacy of Stephen Anderson.
Stephen Anderson was executed by lethal injection at San Quentin State Prison on January 29, 2002. The execution process began at 12:18 a.m. and he was pronounced dead at 12:30 a.m. For his last meal, Anderson selected 2 grilled cheese sandwiches with radishes, 1 pint of cottage cheese, a hominy corn mixture, 1 slice of peach pie, and 1 pint of chocolate chip ice cream. When asked by the warden if he had any last words, he emphatically declined. The public narrative surrounding his execution focused heavily on his unrepentant danger. Commentators expressed the necessity of his death, citing his chronic violence and the impossibility of reform. There is no place that anybody is going to be safe from this individual. This perception of chronic danger, solidified by his extensive criminal history spanning decades, provided the necessary societal closure for the state's ultimate sanction. The ultimate ethical conclusion of the case is complex. The execution confirmed the judicial acceptance that, despite severe and documented constitutional failures regarding his counsel, the gravity of Anderson's total criminality, including 9+ victims, professional contract killings, and institutional homicide, provided sufficient aggravation to overcome the limited mitigation presented, thereby eliminating the prejudice required under the Strickland test. The procedural system failed Anderson in terms of representation, yet the sheer weight of his established homicidal history provided a legal safety net for the state, allowing the execution to proceed under the premise that the capital verdict was correct. Anderson's case remains a crucial reference point for discussions on the constitutional standards of capital defense. The forceful judicial dissent from the Ninth Circuit serves as a lasting indictment of the system that allowed an attorney repeatedly deemed constitutionally incompetent to handle multiple death penalty cases in a single jurisdiction. This failure underscores the ongoing necessity for strict oversight of court-appointed counsel in capital litigation to uphold the fundamental promise of constitutional representation. That brings another episode of Homicide Cases to an end as I close the file on Steven Anderson. Join me next time when I will be opening the file on Patrick Andrews.
That's my file. I may be gone, but the capital punishment debate rages on.
Until next episode, this is Misfit signing off, and as always, stay safe.